Okay, here we go. Good morning and welcome to a beautiful church in downtown Humboldt, First United Methodist Church. I am happy you're here, and I want to apologize from the beginning. I'm having allergy issues and my voice is kind of coming and going, so I'll try not to be very croaky. Our lesson today continues the series it's called The Outside In, and this one is titled Being Bold to Join. The focal passage comes from Luke, and as you may know, and if you don't, I'll tell you, Luke was a physician. He was a close co-worker with Paul, and when he wrote mainly to the Gentiles. He himself was a Gentile who had been converted and became a Christian. The purpose of this lesson is, and this sounds really glitchy, but to grow in sensitivity to the feelings of outsiders, letting that awareness shape our outreach to them. And as we're going to find out, I think our church has been very good about welcoming newcomers, people that haven't been here before, being warm and welcoming and coming up to introduce themselves. So I don't think we're guilty there. We may not follow up as well as we should, but that's a different story. God expects us to reach out to others, to include them. But this is what was new to me. He also encourages those who don't belong to risk being excluded by joining without an invitation. So I want to say that again because to me this was big. God encourages those who don't belong to risk, and then that's big, to risk being excluded, and in some cases ostracized, met with violence by joining in without an invitation. So take just a minute and put this in your brain. Who are the people in our lives today who are not included in our circle, our group? Who does not have our shared memories, our history, our fellowship? Who are those people who risk being excluded by trying to join in? And those are the people we need to be watching for and welcoming. The focal passage for our lesson today is from Luke, chapter 7, verse 36 through 50. I'm just going to read this quickly before we go through it. One of the Pharisees invited Jesus to eat with him. After he entered the Pharisee's home, he took his place at the table. Meanwhile, a woman from the city, an outsider, a sinner, discovered that Jesus was dining in the Pharisee's house, and so she brought oil in a vase made of alabaster. Standing behind him at his feet, now remember they're reclining, standing behind him at his feet and crying, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and she wiped them dry with her hair. She kissed them and poured the oil on them. When the Pharisee who had invited Jesus saw what was happening, he said to himself, "This man was a prophet. He would know what kind of woman she really is. He would know that she is a sinner." Jesus replied, "Simon, I have something to say to you." Simon said, "Teacher, speak." A certain lender had 2 debtors. One owed enough money to pay 500 people for a day's work. The other owed enough money for 50. And when they couldn't pay, the lender forgave them the debts of both. Which of them will love him more? Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the largest debt canceled." Jesus said, "You have judged correctly." Jesus turned to the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? When I entered your home, you didn't give me water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her hair, with her tears, and wiped them with her hair. You didn't greet me with a kiss, but she hasn't stopped kissing my feet since I came in. You didn't anoint my head with oil, but she has poured perfumed oil on my feet. And this is why I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven. So she has shown great love." The one who is forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other table guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this person that even forgives sins?" And Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Has there been a time in your life when you were an outsider? Growing up in a small town, that may not be the case. If you were born and raised here and you never went away, then you have always been an included person. But have you ever moved to a different city, gone to a different school, taken a new job someplace else? These would be times when you would be an outsider. You would not automatically be included. At one time, our family moved around some, and we went to a new church. We were welcomed warmly to the church services, and it was summer, and so they did not have the usual weekday evening events. So the first Wednesday rolled around, and we were like, we're going to go. We went to the dinner, and then everybody split into groups. They had something for all ages. And so we went to the appropriate group for us, and we were welcomed. But we were also told that because this was the beginning of the year, this was just kind of a group meeting. And that next week they would be dividing into their individual groups. And these groups were based on having gone on a spiritual experience. And then this was their group that met together after that experience to continue their walk, supporting each other, helping each other. And so we were kind of wondering which group we would belong to. And when we came back the next week, our children had groups. But there was no group that welcomed us because we did not have that shared experience. And we were left outside wondering what to do. And we never tried again on that Wednesday night. That's not a happy feeling. But it happens. What about when a homeless person comes walking into our church and maybe they don't smell so good? And they walk right down. They don't know what the rules are of the Methodist tradition. They don't sit in the back pew. They don't go sit in the balcony. They come and they sit on the front pew. Or maybe they come and they sit on these steps. This happened in one church. The guy came and he sat right there. The preacher's standing here. He sits right there. He's turned, watching the preacher. One of the deacons of the church got up and everybody was like, "Oh, thank goodness he's going to throw him out." He didn't. He came and he sat with him. He sat with him. He offered him the hospitality of being included. And even though this guy was homeless, smelly, irresponsible in his life choices, he was included. So let's take a closer look at the story from Luke. Verse 36 begins when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus, and this was a very exclusive dinner. High society. All the muckety-mucks were there with all their fancy clothes. All the men muckety-mucks, because the women weren't allowed. It was a formal affair, and if they reclined on couches to eat. So they would come in, and the custom was to be greeted with a kiss. If they were special, maybe they had their heads anointed with oil. They were offered water to wash their feet with. A servant would come, a slave, wash their feet, dry them with a towel, and then they would lie down and begin to eat. Because these events just weren't just dinner, they were also dinner and a show. And the show was ordinary people could come and watch. They could stand on the outside and watch the high society people have their dinner. And this woman that was there, she was probably a prostitute. She was definitely exiled from society. She learned that Jesus was eating there, so she came with her alabaster jar of perfume. And one of the commentaries I read said that Jewish women often carried a jar of the perfume, an alabaster jar, around their necks. So my childhood memories of this story is it's a big jar like this with handles, and she's lugging it in and she pours it. But I don't think that's, after I read that, I'm like, maybe it's not that big jar I was thinking of. Maybe it's a smaller jar. If she can carry it on a chain or a rope around her neck, it can't have been that big giant one. So that kind of makes it even more special. This is expensive. This is her bank account. And as she stood behind him, weeping, she began to wet his feet with tears. She washed his feet, dried them with her hair, which was down. It was unbound. That's a sign of immodesty. Once they're married, they're supposed to keep it up, and obviously they don't go out, but she was out with her hair down. She was definitely an outsider, the lowest of the low. How must she have been feeling? Where did she get the courage to even think about doing what she was doing? When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, but, Jesus heard, or he knew, if this man were a prophet, he would know. Jesus knew. He knew that the woman is a sinner. And the translation from the Greek, as I understand it, is one who missed the mark. How many times have we missed the mark? Jesus said, I have something to tell you. And he says, okay, tell me. He told him a story about the people who owed the moneylender. And then he asked, who will love him more for forgiving it? And Simon replied, and he said, I suppose. It's like, I don't really care. Not interested in this conversation. I'm just answering to be polite because I think you're an idiot who doesn't belong here, because obviously she's a prostitute. I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. And Jesus says, you have judged correctly. Then he turned to the woman and he said to Simon, do you see this woman? She offered me all the things that you did not. It was an obvious attempt to insult Jesus, to put him in his place. He was not welcomed in the customary way. Something else I read about this too, we don't know exactly the details because we're not told, but it doesn't say she brought a basin of water and a towel. She wasn't ready to wash his feet. From what we're told, it was a spontaneous act, and she used what she had. Her tears, grateful, love, her hair. This is the first of 3 stories in Luke that have Jesus eating in the home of a Pharisee. And each presents the clash between the two, the Pharisees and Jesus. Luke 11:38, they were upset with him because he didn't ritually purify his hands before eating. Luke 14:3 occurred on the Sabbath, and Jesus asked the Pharisees if the law allowed healing on the Sabbath. And of course they said no, and he healed the man anyway. Each of these is a clash between a group of people who have made so many rules and laws and have made religion their idol. Their religion has become their idol. They've stopped worshiping God and they're worshiping the rules that they've made. I'm a better person than you because I follow all of these rules. Think about that for a minute. The guests began to say, in verse 49, the guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this? He even forgives sins." The woman didn't pretend to be righteous or deserving of anything. She presented herself with deep humility. Her attitude was one of appreciation, love, gratefulness, as opposed to Levi's attitude of self-righteous indignation. Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." So which came first, love or forgiveness? Did she love because she was forgiven, or was she forgiven because she loved? Why did she risk everything in going in this fashion to a public place where she was definitely not invited, and she was a woman? Simon judged correctly that Jesus was not a prophet because he didn't know the woman's reputation. But he didn't follow the commandment that states you must love your neighbor as yourself. This woman had an open expression of desire in her heart to change her life, change her heart, and Simon did not feel that same way. When have we judged somebody because they don't follow our rules? And we have rules. We have social rules. How are you being called to change that? How are you being called to accept somebody from the outside who comes forward, maybe pushes themselves in or slides in quietly and is risking being excluded? How are you going to treat them? There's a couple other stories I want to read. This is from Luke 8. It's when Jesus raised the dead woman and he healed a sick woman. When Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. There was a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, who came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. Jesus was on his way, and the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there in the crowds. A woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, or years and years. She had spent all she had on doctors, and no one could heal her. Now that she's thought to be a Jewish woman, and she's unclean, ceremonially unclean because of the bleeding. She can't go out. She has no life. She came up behind him, and she touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Her thought was, if I can't talk to him, I'm unclean, but if I can just touch his cloak, I'll be healed. And he was. And Jesus stopped and he said, "Who touched me?" And they all denied it. And Peter said, "There's a lot of people around here. Somebody surely touched you." He said, "No." Jesus said, "No. Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." And then the woman, seeing she could not go unnoticed, she came forward and she fell at his feet. And in the presence of all the people, she told him why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. And Jesus, showing compassion and grace, said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." This is the same thing he said to the woman with the alabaster oil. In John 8, verse 1, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. And at dawn he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. And the teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group, and they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. And in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women." In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, where was the man? Now, what do you say? They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and he started to write on the ground with his finger. He didn't say anything. He just wrote in the dust. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And again, he stooped down and began to write on the ground. And at this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. My mind presents this picture of this crowd of angry men yelling and shouting and jostling to be heard, melting quietly away. Nobody's looking. It's my turn. I'm going to just go home. I have an errand to run. Jesus straightened up and he said, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one." "Then neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." She was shown grace and forgiveness. And because of that, she could discover her own goodness and find the strength in herself to sin no more. She was not judged, but she was given grace. And because she had the grace, she had the peace to find the strength to sin no more, to find a different way to live. So both these women, the sinner who washed and anointed his feet at the dinner and the woman caught in adultery, were trapped in a degrading lifestyle. They didn't feel they had any other choice. Jesus moved past society's judgment and allowed them to express their gratitude at being accepted for who they were right then and to be forgiven. Simon didn't see this woman's desperation. He only saw someone that was defined by legalism. So I challenge you today to go out and be bold to join someplace you're not already included, to risk being excluded, to risk being asked to leave, to risk being social embarrassment in order to take the love of God with you someplace else, because we're called to go out. And I also challenge you to risk becoming a social pariah by bringing in or accepting someone who is bold to join, someone who is an outsider risking everything and coming in to your group, whether it be here in this church, your social circle, or wherever you move, where you work, the places where you go every day. Look for these people that are on the outside wanting to come in and be the one that offers love, forgiveness, God's grace. This is a spiritual practice of hospitality. Let us be like the woman that risked everything to come forward to receive forgiveness and get God's love. I want to leave you with this from Luke 7, verse 50. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. God in heaven, help us to be like these people, risking everything to come to you. Let us be welcoming for all who want to come in. Let us offer your love, your grace, your peace, and your forgiveness as it's been offered to us. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.